Okay, hello everybody and welcome to ButteredGaming. I'm Buttered Toast the Third, and today I'm going to be continuing my Java for Beginners tutorial. As you can see up here, today is episode 7, and we are going to be looking at switch statements and conditional operators. So before we get into it, we're going to do our always obligatory class initialization. Maybe if I can spell. There we go. So we got our public class and then the file name, and I called this switch conditional just because I can. And we'll do our curly braces. And then we need our also obligatory main statement. And we can go public static void main string args. There we go. And I think from now on I might just put those in before I start the video because I think I've done it enough. I think for those of you who are watching, you'll know that you need to do that. So we'll just leave it at that. And then we can get into our switch statements. Alright, so switch statements are basically for use when you have a lot of conditions, basically. So we talked about if statements the last video or the video before. I don't even remember right now, but we talked about them a little earlier in the series. So if you have a situation where you have a ton of conditions, like you wanted to I don't know, check if you generate a random number and check which number is generated. So if we wanted to generate a random number, we can do that. But to do that, I think I showed you this before, but we need to import the random class. So we can do that by the same way we import the scanner. We can go import java.util.random, and then we can close that. There we go. And then we need to initialize the random object, which would be random, my random being the name of the object, same way I do the scanners, as you may or may not notice, equals new random, and we don't need to pass in any variables in the parentheses there. So that's the random object, and then we need to have our we'll have a variable section up on top here. Variables, oops, if I actually comment that out, variables, so we can have our int rand int equals 0. We'll just initialize that to 0. So then we need to generate our random number, which would be rand int equal my random dot next integer, because our variable type is indeed an integer. And we're going to make this just 1 through 10, just keep it easy. And to keep it 1 through 10, we have to do the +1 thing that I showed you before when I talked about this. Alright, so now we can talk about our switch statements. So I'll go ahead and move that switch statement comment down here. Switch statements. So instead of doing something like this with if statements, so you can go if rand int equal 1, execute this code, or you can do another if statement, or you can do like else if rand int equal oops, man, I'm just not doing so well here. Execute this code, and then we can do else if, I forgot to, there we go, rand int equal 3, execute this code, etc. until randint equal 10. So instead of doing something like that, we could use, use a switch statement. So a switch statement looks something like this. Switch, surprise, surprise, lowercase, there we go. My goodness, there it goes. And then you also, like the if statement, you have your parameters, but you're going to put in the integer that's storing the value in this case. So in this case, we'll go randint. And then you'll do your curly braces to show that it's a block of code. So once we get in here, you're going to have what are called cases, which are basically your if statements. So you can have case 1, and then you put a little semicolon or whatever, and then you can execute this code. And then once you're done in the case, you have to break it, which is accomplished just by typing break with a semicolon on the end. And then you can go down and do case 2, execute this code, break it again, case 3, execute this code, break it again, case etc. until 10, and then you'll execute the code, etc., etc. So you might be wondering, well, how does the switch know which case to use? And it's actually determined, so whatever the value for random int is going to find the case corresponding to that number. So if randint is equal to 2 and I generate the random number, it'll go to case 2 and execute my apologies, whatever code is within the case 2. So that works. So you're wondering probably, what happens if you don't break it? Well, what happens if you don't break it is that it will continue through that case. It will execute whatever code is in the case and then continue on in the switch and execute everything underneath it until it finds a break. So that's not very helpful unless you're doing it on purpose, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. So something that's kind of optional in a switch is the default class, or case. I apologize, not class, the default. Oh man, I can't type. There we go, default case. So you just type default to use it, and then you do your little semicolon like you would for the other ones, and then you can execute that code. This code will execute if the value checked by the switch does not equal one of the cases. So in this case, I only have 1 through 3. So in this case, if the randint equaled like 4 or 5 or something, it would go to the default. But it's an optional thing. Default is optional. You don't have to have one. It's just makes it easy. And you can break at the end of your switch statement, but if it's the very last case, you really don't have to, since there's nothing else underneath it. So that's pretty much a switch statement in its simplest form. But if we wanted to, I talked about you could leave out a break on purpose. So if you wanted to, we could leave out breaks. So if I did another switch and we just used randint again, just because I can, if I did that and I had case 1, there we go, and I executed, actually, what if I didn't have anything in the case? And then if I had case 2, and again, I don't have code. And as you'll notice, I'm not breaking it. So I'll go ahead and put that in there. I'm not breaking. I won't break again. So then if I had like case 3 and I finally put some code in here, something like system.out.println, the number is either 1, 2, or 3, and then I broke it, it would tell me that the number is between 1 and 3, because if it hits 1, it won't do anything. There's no code here, and since it's not broken, it'll go down to 2. And again, there's no code going to be executed, so it's not going to do anything. And again, I didn't break it, so it's going to go down to case 3, and finally it's going to run the code, and then it'll break. So if I had something after it, like for example, I had case 4, and I didn't put code or break it. Now if I had case 5, and I did put code again, I could do something like system.out.println. The number is either 4 or 5. There we go. So it could be like something like that, and then I break it again. And again, you don't have to have a default, so I won't put a default here because I don't have to. So if there's no default and it doesn't hit one of the cases, it just exits the switch and doesn't do anything. So you can do it that way if you'd like. And also your expression for the switch, doesn't have to be just one variable. Well, it does have to be one number, but you can like manipulate the variables. I don't know what I want to say for that. It doesn't have to be just one. I don't know. Variable value. Variable. So if I had something like, if I generated another couple random numbers, rand_int2 equals 0. If I had like rand_int3 equals 0, and then I generated a couple more random numbers, I can go rand_int2 equal my random.next integer. There we go. 10 plus 1 again. If I wanted, I can go rand_int3 equal my random.next int, and I had it. I can do whatever I want. 100 plus 1. Next, not next. I don't even know. All right, so then if I had those, I could come down to this other switch statement that we made, so we can go switch, and then when you put in your expression here, it could be rand_int2 plus rand_int3, and then I could put my cases here if I wanted. And then also, the cases don't have to be in order. So if I did something like case 5, there we go, execute code, break, and then I did like case 2, execute code, break, and then I did case 94, execute code, break. I could do that. Maybe if I could spell break. There we go. I could do it that way if I wanted. But even though you can do something like this, add variables, you can't use conditions as your expression. So you can't have a switch like this. Switch, and then you have your things there, and you can't have something like randint 2 and randint 3. So you can't do something like that. Just putting that out there. All right, so the last thing we have to look at here are conditional operators. So if we were to do something and evaluate, so if we had we need a Boolean for conditional operators. So if we had a Boolean conditional, I don't know, example Boolean equal true. Why not? There we go. So if I had an example Boolean for something and I wanted to say give an integer value, how many how much did I win at betting, or so, I don't know. So I need another integer to put values into based on whether or not the Boolean is true or false. So if I had something like, I don't know, we'll call it a sign int, I don't know, equals 0. So we'll do that. So then, if we had something like a switch statement, and we did something like, say, randint, and if it equals, say, case 1 through case 5 or something, and then once we're at 5, let me just fix this up, there we go. We can say if it's case 1 through 5, it would assign our example bool to, say, true. And then we can break that. And then if we had case 6 through case 10, we could assign the example bool to false, and then we can break it. And if that's true, we can come down here and say, and use our conditional operator. So in most cases you would, well, not in most cases, but if you didn't have the conditional operator, you would assign based on, say, using an if statement to check if the Boolean is true or false. However, in this case, we can use a conditional operator. So if we did something like assign, what is it, assign var or assign int? I don't know, assign int. Okay, assign int equals, so then we have example bool, and then for the conditional operators, you do your Boolean name, like I just did, example bool, and then you have to put a question mark after it. And then after that, you put the value that you're going to assign if the Boolean is true, which can be whatever we want. So we'll go, I don't know, 15. And then you have to put another like colon, semicolon, whichever one that is. You can put whatever the second value, this is the value that if it's going to be false. So we can put, I don't know, 20. Sure, why not? And then we can end that. So we can save it. So as you can see, we're assigning a value based on whether the example boolean is true, which would be 15, or false, which would be 20. So there you go. You can just look at that if you'd like. The operator, using the operator. There we go. I don't know. Hopefully that makes sense for you. Formula for the conditional operator would be, there we go, would be Boolean name, there we go, a question mark, value if true, a semicolon, and then value if false. So hopefully when you look at the code that makes sense. What do I have? Never using the sign in variable. That's okay. We are, actually. You just don't know. It's right here. Well, we're assigning value to it. We're never actually using the variable, though. So anyway, there's that. And hopefully that makes sense for you. That's actually really all I've got for this video. I'm going to stop now. I usually take a while to stop in these videos. But thank you very much for watching. As always, you can find the code on ButteredGaming.com/source. I have links in the description below. And I'll catch you next time. Thanks for watching.
Hope you liked the video. If you did, you can click on the previous general upload there to see a Minecraft Dual Players episode. Or you can click on the previous playlist upload to see the previous video in this playlist if you haven't already. Thanks again for watching.